What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. Thanks for taking the time and joining us here for another week. So, this week, I wanted to just talk about simplicity because all too often, I think when we're trying to get back to doing something or we're trying to implement a new habit, a new action, or whatever it is, that all too often one of the reasons I've seen and I personally feel like I've failed with a lot of things that I've tried to change or implement in the past is just overcomplicating things. And simplicity is, I feel, is the key to moving everything forward. Why? Because the simpler the actions that you have to take, the more likely you are going to be to take those actions, as well as the more likely you are going to be able to follow through with them. Now, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and if you're into science and kind of the science behind different things as it pertains to your overall health and well-being, I'd strongly recommend that you go and listen to the Huberman podcast, which Andrew Huberman he's a PhD and he's a professor at Stanford over in the US, and the podcast that I was listening to was about the science behind the change of habit. And there's a few different things that I got out of that podcast, but number one, and this is probably a different topic, but one thing that I found really interesting was that there was a study that was done that showed that any change in habit could take from 18 to about 250 days to actually take place. And there's an old adage that gets thrown around where it's like, it takes 21 days to form a new habit. And that can be true in part, but I guess what I took away from that is everyone is very, very different when it comes to changing a habit or making big lifestyle changes. And the big thing, the underlying thing that it really comes down to is how much, for lack of a better term, internal friction there is when you are trying to change it. And it depends on obviously what it is. It depends on you as a person. And there is a scale of change that I've referred to in a couple of other podcasts where it or a continuum, I guess is the better word for it. But if we were to look on one end of the continuum where there is you're not even thinking about changing it, you're not ready for it, you don't even want to hear it, all the way through to the other end of the continuum or the spectrum where you know what you need to do, you're ready to do it, and you're starting to take action to make that change. There's different stages of that continuum. There's different levels of internal friction, and when you're at the point where you're ready to make change, that internal friction can be reduced, whereas when you're at the point where, or even in that middle section, that internal friction where you are going to take action can be at its peak or at its highest. And this is one of the factors that plays into our ability to make change in our life, is how much, again, for lack of a better term, internal friction there is around us taking those actions and habits to change. That's going to affect how long it is going to take that change to stick. It is going to depend on a whole bunch of other lifestyle factors. And for some of us, when it's something that is brand new to us, whether it be a mindset shift, so it be around trying to dig ourselves up out of a hole, or it be around, changing a negative behavior that we have within ourselves, or it be around making a conscious effort to improve our physical well-being, there is different factors that are going to play into your ability to make that change and how long it's going to take you to actually set that in. And again, just highlighting like the fact that they have actually done a study on this where it is that 18 to like 250 days, depending on a whole bunch of factors, can actually take that old adage that you hear a lot where it's like 21 days to change a habit, which I think there's a lot of people like throw around as a moniker to really just be like, hey, you've only got to do this for 21 days and it's going to stick. Because I've seen a lot of people that have stuck to something for a month and then just haven't been able to continue with it. There's been things that I've done in my life where I've tried to be super religious with them for a month, and then it's just gotten to the end of the month and I've gone, you know what, like I'm going to put this in the too hard basket. And back to what I initially said, one of the things that I think for a lot of people can reduce that internal friction and can reduce how hard it is going to be to make a change and how long it's going to be for it to stick is simplicity. Because all too often we try and just overcomplicate things because we think we've got to do more. We think that more is better. And if we're not doing it in the first place, trying to bite off more than we can chew, or more than we can do is probably a more apt line, is potentially setting us up for failure. And not only setting us up for failure in the fact that we're not going to follow through with it, but it is going to start to create mild anxiety around what we are doing because we're maybe not going to be able to fulfill our promise to ourselves. And by not being able to fulfill that promise to ourselves, it's going to make us feel pretty shitty about not only the thing that we're trying to change, but also about ourselves, because there's this one, I guess, idea that I've been playing with in my mind. And I think a lot of the time when we get down on ourselves, it's potentially because, I'm when I say us, I'm more talking about me, right? There's been different times where I feel really down on myself, and then when I've stood back and I've kind of looked at why I'm feeling down about myself, it's because I've made a promise to myself to do something and I haven't been able to fulfill it. So I don't feel like I've held up my end of the bargain. I don't feel like a man of my word, and that creates this disconnect. So when I'm trying to change something, or I'm trying to create change within whatever it is, like internally, health, business, relationships, if I'm overcomplicating the actions that I've got to take, the likelihood of me not continuing to follow through that, because I'm not able to maintain the promise I've made to myself, is going to go through the roof. And then it creates this knock-on effect and this flow-on effect around not wanting to do the thing that I'm trying to change, or not wanting to, or just feeling like shit because I haven't been able to follow through on what I've said I'm going to do. So if you're at a point where you're looking to make some changes around whatever it is, insert your goal here. Like we're now at the end of January, and for all intents and purposes, most people that I've talked to around like my community and, you know, this kind of area that we're in, we've had a pretty shitty start to the year, right? Like each year it starts off and we're like, all right, new year, new me, whatever you want to look at, or whatever goal you want to set, whatever you want to change. Like we turn that page in the book and we're trying to move forward to be better around what we're doing. But maybe it hasn't happened. And for certain things with me, there's been factors, whether it be internal or external, which have impacted the way I would have liked the year to have started off. And there's certain things that I've looked at that I've wanted to achieve that I haven't been able to. And some of that has been around me just overcomplicating the actions that I need to take, trying to do too much. And now when I've stepped back and I've taken this look at, all right, what do I actually need to do to make some really quality changes, and tried to simplify it to a point to try and get in actions, habits, and behaviors that are going to be sustainable for me long term. It's taken a little bit of that anxiety and that depressive state out of what I'm trying to do. So simplicity is key, I believe, when you are trying to make some change, or you are trying to move the needle in a different direction. Because when I was listening to that podcast and one of those big takeaways, change is going to take a different time to implement for everybody. And one of the biggest factors that is going to be there is going to be that internal friction that is created when we're trying to take some action. Because for some of us, it's going to be higher than others, and that's going to be very dependent on where we actually are on that spectrum of change, like where we are, how ready for the change we are. And there's going to be some change that you are going to be able to make, that you are going to be able to take a big chunk out of it. You are going to be able to make massive changes, and it is going to stick. And all power to you if you are able to do that. That is awesome. That is amazing. What I've gone through in this podcast probably isn't meant for you, but if you're the type of person that you're constantly getting down on yourself because you're constantly trying to make this change around whatever aspect it is in your life that you want to make this change, and you just can't nothing you do seems to stick. Whatever it is, whether it's, if I'm just going to use training as an example, let's say you've been trying to implement training into your life since you've had kids and it just has not been sticking. Well, let's look at what you're trying to do. Are you trying to go back to doing like 5 sessions a week, 6 sessions a week, and just trying to go all in like you were before your kids? Well, I would put it to you that maybe the plan is too complex. And I would say that if you're trying to do that complex plan and you're not able to stick to it, all of a sudden you're starting to hate training. You're not wanting to do it. You're feeling shitty about yourself because you're not following through on what you said. And that is all going to boil down to the fact that you have just made a plan that is far too complex for you. So, to finish, like, simplicity is key. Try and keep it as simple as possible when you're trying to make some changes. And it may be that you need to start off with just doing something once a week, or doing a very small thing once a day, and something that you don't need to think about, you don't need to go anywhere for. Maybe if it's, if it's trying to change physically, maybe it's just going for a walk, sticking your shoes on, going for a 15-minute walk each day, or even just doing it 3 times a week, making it super manageable to try and reduce that internal friction. And then when that's set in, maybe you ramp it up a little bit more. But also don't put pressure on yourself for that to set in after 3 weeks. Like 21 days, even though there's that old adage around, is not necessarily the amount of time it's going to take for every single person for change to set in. So you need to be aware of that. You need to be aware that for you it might be a little bit longer. For you it might be a little bit less. If that's the case, great. But putting pressure on yourself to do these things after 3 weeks, a month, it's not fair on you, because firstly, you're comparing yourself to other people, and this is your own journey. But also, too, everyone's very, very different. You're different at how that's going to set. Where you are, the internal friction that a particular action will create within you is very, very different to the internal friction for the same action for a different person. Okay, so if you and I are trying to implement the same thing, the resistance that I feel is going to be different to the resistance that you feel. So, simplicity, I feel, is going to be key. It's going to be the easiest thing and make it, and that doesn't mean it's not going to be hard, right? There's still going to be some level of resistance and some level of friction, but the more you complicate it, the more friction you're going to create. And in turn, it's going to have that knock-on and that snowball effect where mentally you're not going to feel like doing it, and you're just going to get over it, and you're just going to get down on yourself, and that's not what we want. Like, if you're trying to make a positive change, it should be that. It should be a positive change mentally, physically, and emotionally. So keep it simple, guys. That's probably the big advice for this week. Hopefully you got something out of today. There's links in the show notes for all the different stuff. So social media, there's links to our private Facebook group. There's also links to our training program if you are looking to make a change in training. One of the easiest things you can do is follow a plan. We've got a pretty simple plan there to try and keep you on track and keep you going. So if you need anything, as always, reach out. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate your time. Catch you later. Bye.